Hello viewers and welcome to yet another Warhammer 40,000 Conquest video production. My name is Mitch and I am the Hive Tyrant. Today I'm pleased to present you with still another installment in my continuing series of community spotlight videos in which I interview various prominent and upstanding members of the Conquest LCG community. In the past we discussed guests' favorite decks and how best to pilot their preference of Warlord. But now that I've completed an initial interview and guest analysis for each of the Warlords from the core set, the Warlord cycle, and the Great Devourer, I now seek to finish taking a preliminary look at the Warlords included within the Planetfall cycle of war packs. So, expect a discussion that's largely based on experience, yet which still contains some speculation and theory, largely because of the newness of these Warlords, but hopefully through guests sharing their initial impressions and opinions, all within the context of hundreds of previous games worth of experience, they'll be able to provide you with a wealth of information, useful to both new and veteran players alike. If you enjoyed this video, remember to hit the like button, ensure you're subscribed, and you're always encouraged to share, because the more engagement these videos receive, the more viewers are reached, and ever the broader you help grow our Conquest community. But with our introduction aside, let's get things started with a discussion of our recently released Tau faction warlord, Commander Starblaze. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, but before we get started with the greater good propaganda, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and let our viewers know how you're involved in the Conquest LCG community.
Sure thing. My name is Guy Lev, better known as Glaive Guy. I've been playing Conquest since it was released last year. Primarily, I'm playing on Octagon, as live games are harder for me to get to, so a lot of folks who frequent the forums online would know me from there. And also, I'm a pretty common poster on the Card Game DB forums. My claim to fame is that I was top 4 in the Season 1 Octagon League and top 8 in the very latest season that had just concluded.
Right. Well, I very much appreciate your handing me one of scarcely few defeats last season of the Octagon League, so you've got that accolade to your name. Of course, you've been in tons of the preview videos that I've been doing for the Planetfall Cycle Warlords, and I suppose on this subject of Planetfall Cycle Warlords, early on, you mentioned you took a special interest in Commander Starblaze. Something about him stood out to you as uniquely appealing. I guess, what is there to like? Commander Starblaze can ally with Astra Militarum faction cards, but what's special about him? Why the interest there?
Well, in general, the Tau are my favorite faction. I've been following 40k, if not actively playing it, for years now, and I'm a big fan of the lore. And in particular, the Tau are just really appealing. I like their aesthetic, I like their playstyle, and I just kind of like that they're a little less dreary in the 40k grimdark universe. In the tabletop game, Conquest in particular, I like the Tau playstyle, even if they are not perhaps the most competitive. I like their focus on attachments. I like the sort of way their units play out their theme of the faction, and I think Starblaze is a good example of that, being as he can ally with Astra Militarum units. It echoes the Gue'vesa auxiliaries, the human allies of the Tau Empire from the lore, and I think it plays out really well on the table.
Well, definitely. I mean, granted, the Tau already have two pretty reasonable choices for Warlord. There's the very attachment-focused Commander Shadowsun. There's the ethereal Armorbane conferring on She. Obviously, Commander Starblaze has a whole range of different cards at his disposal, but what is it in particular that's to like about this Warlord? Like, what unique opportunities does he have or offer that our other Tau options just don't?
So obviously you mentioned that he has access to Astra Militarum units, and that really is the appeal of this Warlord. It offers you a completely different set of cards to choose from when building a Tau deck, and It's a different playstyle, I think, from Shadow Sun or Anshi. Shadow Sun's playstyle is, as you say, attachment focused. When you're building Shadow Sun, you're always thinking to yourself, how do I make the best use of her ability? And that dictates, to a great extent, how you play her. You want to commit to planets with units on them, so you can, use her ability most often. You have the luxury of pitching cards for shields that you can recur from your discard pile. Whereas Anshi obviously has a very aggro style, very aggressive, making full use of the Armor Bane, and the Orbital City to a lesser extent. Starblaze is a bit different in that he gives you access to the Astra Militarum cards, which puts the focus squarely on units as opposed to attachments. You have to, pick and choose the best Astra Militarum units to go into your deck. Do you want to focus on command? Do you want to focus on ranged? And so the appeal there is just the different options that he offers you. It's a different way of playing the faction, and I think a really cool spin on how the Tau can execute.
Yeah. Well, as a Warlord unit himself, he's kind of got a very unique effect. His reaction is when he's commit to a planet, you can move an Astra Militarum unit you control from an adjacent planet to his planet. I guess, obviously Commander Shadowsun is going to be bouncing attachments back into play from your discard pile, putting them into play from your hand. How exactly do you typically maneuver Starblaze as a unit himself?
One of the common ways to use Starblaze's movement ability is as a Planet 1 or 2 bully. The dream is to have, say, a Assault Valkyrie, a 4/4 flying Astra Militarum unit, sitting on Planet 2, and then you commit Starblaze and his Warlord train to Planet 1, and you see if the enemy Warlord follows suit. If they do, then you can move a fresh Valkyrie into combat with you. If not, then you have it sitting there for the next round.
Right. And I suppose the opposite is true, too. You could deploy pretty heavily to planet number 1, and if you don't need quite so many units there, you can kind of relocate those as necessary.
Exactly.
What about some of the components of his, signature squad? He's certainly got a lot of different tricks at his disposal. The Ardent Auxiliaries really help with that Planet 1 bullying style. If they get swept up into your HQ, provided you can send them to a planet where you have an AM unit, they end up being readied. I guess, what are your thoughts in regard to his signature cards?
Sure. So the Auxiliaries are a 2/2 unit, which is not the strongest. 2/2 for 2 resources is, I guess, what you'd call the baseline. As you say, they're good if you can get them to trigger in their ability to trigger out of your headquarters. Putting them down on Planet 1, perhaps next to an Assault Valkyrie, is a good way to have a solid presence on Planet 1, and then you see if the enemy Warlord bites. If they go to Planet 1, then they've got to deal with that while you commit to Planet 2. If they don't commit to Planet 1, then you pull your Valkyrie over, your Auxiliaries capture the planet, and go into HQ to ready next turn. The trouble is, it's not that easy to make it happen. Your opponent, if they're fighting you on that planet, will, if they see the unit there, then they'll try and kill it, obviously. You've got to be able to keep it alive for its ability to trigger, and that's not easy with only 2 hit points.
Sure. Well, I guess just in regard to other AM units we might be seeing, your signature units key off of that. Commander Starblaze's ability only affects those units. You happen to mention kind of having to make a bit of a difficult choice between, ranged units, command-heavy units, the big expensive AM units like your Valkyrie. What kind of things do you normally include in your deck to fight alongside these guys?
So you have, like you said, you have the command options, which is the Iron Guard Recruits and the Psyker, the Sanctioned Psyker. And one of Starblaze's strengths is his access to all of these 2 hammer command units for 2 resources or less. You have the Recon Drone and the Trailblazer on the Tau side, the Recruits and the Psyker on the Astra Militarum side. And it's a choice of how deeply you want to go into command dominance, depending how many of those you want to take. Balancing that, you have other cheap units from the Astra Militarum side, such as the Rattling Deadeye or the Tal'aran Raiders, both of which are cost 1, but are ranged or Warlord groupie respectively. So when you're taking Astra Militarum units, as you say, there's sort of a low and high. You can go really cheap. You can take a lot of very cheap units, like those two 1-cost units. You could even take the Mystic Warden, which is a 0-cost 2/2 unit. Or you can choose to go more expensive with units like the Valkyrie. You could take the Steel Legion Chimera to keep your other warrior and soldier units safe. It depends on the style of deck you want to take. Personally, I think that Starblaze excels at the long game, which means you definitely want to have a lockdown on command to keep cards and resources flowing into your hand. So I personally like taking 3 of the Sanctioned Psyker and the Iron Guard recruits, as both have a little more staying power than the Trailblazer. To complement those with command, I would also take the Recon Drone, which is just a fantastic unit and very efficient. As far as offense, it's common to take maybe 2 to 3 Valkyries. The Valkyrie is an expensive unit, but as we've talked about before, the movement ability that Starblaze offers gives it a little more oomph and a little less risk of it just sitting exhausted coming out of HQ. You can move it to where it's most useful.
Well, definitely. I suppose apart from kind of relocating his units, first planet bullying, are there any other things that really stand out to you as some of Commander Starblaze's greatest strengths? Like, what are some of the other things that he just does better than perhaps some of the other Tau faction warlords?
Well, we talked about the range dominance, and just to elaborate on that, he does have access to 6 ranged units that cost only 1. This being the Rattling Deadeyes and the Viorla Marksmen.
Right.
This allows him to really lock down planets versus warlords that don't have hard control abilities to prevent them from being hit by range damage. And this complements his other biggest strength, which is spike damage. Starblaze has access to the Catachan Outpost, which can buff you for 2, support that can buff your units for 2 damage. And also the Ion Rifle, which is a extra 3 damage. This can allow for up to a 5-point swing in damage, and it's a lot to deal with for any factions that don't have access to things like Indomitable or other damage negation abilities. As well, he has his signature ability, which is the Bond of Brotherhood. Gives +2 attack to Astra Militarum units, gives +2 health to Tau units, which makes him really strong in the late game and pitched battles, battles that have at least 3 army units on your side and the enemy. Using abilities like that, you can outlast and force multiply each of your units that are on the board.
Well, definitely. I guess, are there any particular matchups that Starblaze happens to do reasonably well against? You mentioned that Indomitable is always a convenient answer to kind of work around some giant spike in attack value, some big incoming blow. But is there anything that Starblaze does particularly well against, faction-wise or in regard to warlords?
I think Starblaze is at his best against factions that don't have access to hard control, like I'd mentioned. Things like routing or direct exhaustion of units can really shut down like his range dominance. You can have +20 damage on a Viorla Marksman, but does you no good if they're routed off the planet or exhausted and miss out on the range phase.
Sure.
So the factions he would do well against would be things like Orcs or other Tau, or even against the Astra Militarum warlords, who have limited access to exhaustion abilities. It's potentially good against some of the stronger factions like Space Marines if you are able to play around the Indomitable. Spread out your damage a bit. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Instead, spread out the damage across multiple units at a planet. I think you can, because against Space Marines, they have less access to these 2 hammer command units, so you could potentially starve them of command and choke them that way.
Well, on the opposite end of the spectrum, are there any matchups where you feel Commander Starblaze really struggles? Like, what are some of his areas of weakness that certain factions or warlords could exploit, apart from, like, the pinpoint target removal and those, card effects everybody's kind of learned to dread, like Archon's Terror and effects of that nature?
So, as you say, aside from Archon's Terror and Clayvax, which is strong against everybody, you have things like Eldorath with his point exhaustion, and you also have the issue of a lot of your units have very low hit points. Most of the Astra Militarum and Tau units you'll probably be taking have around 2 hit points, For example, the Mystic Warden has 2, the Ogren has 2, the Talon Raiders have 2, Viola Marksmen, Borkhan Recruits, all of them have 2 hit points, which makes them vulnerable to direct damage effects, like you'd see out of Chaos.
Yeah.
Both for Zarathor especially, but also for Kugath. You're going to have a hard time keeping your units alive when they're taking damage outside of the combat phase. This also shuts down your range dominance if you're being killed before you can even take a swing.
Does it seem like there are any specific cards in particular that you always dread seeing? Kind of apart from what we've already mentioned, are there any, like, real counters to Commander Starblaze?
Specific cards that he has trouble dealing with besides point control are things like the Gleeful Plague Beast, which will potentially wipe out your whole army, again, before you can take a swing.
Right, even with ranged.
Yep. It's going to be things like Wild Rider Squadron or other units that have the ability to move into combat after all of your weak units are exhausted. So that also include things like Eager Recruits, other ambush units like we're seeing out of Selene Morn or Subject Omega coming up. Things like the Drop Pod Assault, any way that to get units into the field before you have a chance to blow them away, essentially. You do have access to this yourself in the form of the Ennui Prelate or possibly the Staging Ground. And that could be a way to shore up the weakness that Starblaze has in this regard.
Well, in regard to a just general strategy for piloting Commander Starblaze, like how do you kind of go about actually playing a game? So there's a lot of opportunity for combos with this Warlord, but how do you go about, playing toward a victory? How do you go about trying to execute some of these tricks?
It's very important with any Warlord really, but with Starblaze in particular, to look at the planet layout and know exactly how long it will take to win the game. I mentioned that Starblaze excels at the long game, where he can get his command units down, he can get a steady supply of resources to get all the units that he needs onto the field. He does best when there's a lot of units of mixed strength, so a lot of weenie units and maybe a Valkyrie or an Elite here and there. So you want to look at the planet layout, and if you see that you're going to lose, if you give up the first 3 planets, you're going to lose the game, then you need to adjust accordingly and focus. Maybe you don't put out all of your command units on turn 1. Maybe you put down a Valkyrie or another stronger unit to hold down planet 1 or 2. Just something to extend the game out further so that you can really make use of your ability to move units around, make use of your strong command game, and lengthen the game out. To that end, some of the best tricks to use for Starblaze are, we've mentioned moving the Valkyrie around. You can put down a Catachan outpost and maybe ion rifles, and then just make a spread of ranged units to threaten multiple planets to keep the enemy Warlord sort of guessing. You don't want them to, like say you have a Catachan outpost and an ambush platform. That gives you a lot of pressure to put down across the map on any unit that the enemy Warlord can't kill in one hit. Because if they don't kill it, then they've got to be able to account for 5 damage swing in the combat map, which for a lot of Warlords is enough to bloody them outright. So that's another way. Put pressure across the map, keep the enemy Warlord guessing, move your units, keep them alive, and play for the long game.
Well, considering that Commander Starblaze's playstyle is pretty dissimilar to what we've seen with Shadowsun, what we've seen with Anshi, granted, he's got access to the entire swath of common Astra Militarum faction cards, but are there any Tau faction inclusions that might see prominent play with Starblaze that are kind of a non-presence for our other Warlords?
It's an interesting question, and it's something you're always looking for with these new Warlords and cards coming out, is what old cards might they be activating that haven't seen much play before. I think that Starblaze might make some better use of the Fire Warrior Elite, the 3-cost unit that can assign itself as the defender to an opponent's attacking unit. You don't see this too often in Anshi because that unit has such low attack, so it can't make much use of Armorbane. You see it here and there in Shadowsun, but it's not the most efficient unit, again, because of the low attack and the higher cost. But I think with Starblaze, given the aforementioned weakness that some of these Astra Militarum anti-units have in their hit points, I think that's a good card to shore up some of their weaknesses. As well, there's a lot of talk about using the Dozer Blade, which isn't a Tau card. It's an AM card that didn't see much use.
Yeah.
But talk of using that to beef up the Valkyrie, which Starblaze makes better use of than other AM Warlords. And also potentially the Devilfish, which is another card that Starblaze could perhaps make some better use of as well. The Devilfish, the one 3-cost vehicle with 4 attack, 2 hit points that readies when it comes out of HQ, synergizes well with the Ardent Auxiliaries.
Definitely.
And the Dozer Blade is again a way to shore up the weakness in the Tau unit HP. Similar vein is the Hostile Environment Gear, another AM attachment that can keep some of your weaker units alive. So as far as other Tau cards that might see play, you have the standards like Deception and the Heavy Marker Drone. But one of the issues, I think, with Starblaze is that we've been a bit spoiled with Shadow Sun in the attachment department, in that she has the luxury of throwing attachments away for shields and playing them for free. But I've noticed when playing Starblaze, attachments feel really expensive when you have to play them for every single resource that they cost, and you can't just throw them out from your discard pile.
Right.
So it's a little harder for him to use units like the Heavy Marker Drone, or especially the Repulsor Impact Field, which is a 2-cost attachment. And those 2 resources feel much more expensive than they do out of Shadow Sun, who can just throw them on a unit for free.
It's always interesting to me to kind of take a look at similar games and see how they do, attachments or equipment differently. Like in Magic the Gathering, they kind of moved away from a single enchant creature type card to a piece of equipment that you pay a cost to affix to something. And then if that creature ends up killed, you can kind of pay the cost again and re-equip it to something else. Commander Shadowsun provided a really nice, convenient means of recursion. And that definitely is not the case with Starblaze. So just playing a match or watching a match, it's always a little bit of a tragedy every time I see an ion rifle discarded as shields or something like that, just because it does feel and look like it's so much more significant when a big, powerful piece of equipment is suddenly gone. And I suppose on the topic of just equipment, something we've yet to talk about is the Searing Burst Cannon, that signature attachment. You affix it to any unit, and whenever it happens to damage an enemy unit with an attack, if they don't shield, you double the damage taken. It only costs 1, so it's free with Ambush Platform, but have you had much success with that card? Like, what's your opinion on that signature attachment?
The signature attachments in general are hard to strategize for, given that there's only 1 in a deck. You can mitigate that to some extent with the Earthcast Technician. So Tau units and those with access to that can plan a bit more for this card. I think Searing Burst Cannon is at its best on the Warlord itself, given that if you put it on a unit with 2 high attack, then really you put it on a Valkyrie, the Valkyrie is probably going to kill what it's swinging at anyway with 4 damage.
Right.
If you put it on a unit with 2 low HP, like say a Stalwart Ogren, then you're going to lose that card. As you said, you can't recur these attachments. Once it's gone, it's gone. So obviously it's best on the Warlord with his 2 attack. And this allows you to maybe make the enemy pitch more shields than they had otherwise wanted to. Maybe you can take a 2 damage attack and keep on fighting with a lot of units. But you can't take 4 damage. Anyone is going to take pause at taking 4 damage in a single swing. So maybe they have to discard an event that they were holding and hoping to use later on. Maybe they have to just start emptying their hands of cards that they wanted to use. And so it's really best, the earlier you get it, the better, really, because you want Starblaze to be swinging and causing them to drop these cards that they wanted to play.
Yeah.
So in a way, it can kind of choke them on cards, and is also at its best when you are yourself choking the enemy on cards, keeping them from getting shields into hand. So if you see this card in your opening hand, which is the ideal, because then you can start playing with it in mind. So if you see it in your opening hand, you say to yourself, okay, maybe I want to lock down the two card drop bandits and keep him from getting any shields in hand. And that way you can, just one other way of choking them. They have to discard more shields, or they're going to start taking a hellacious amount of damage out of Starblaze.
Right. Well, considering this is a piece of war gear and it can't be affixed to vehicles, I mean, apart from your Warlord, are there any, have you played this on other units? Is there maybe a dream non-Warlord unit to equip this to? Or is it, basically just reserved for Starblaze?
You would, if not Starblaze, then you again would want to put it onto a high HP unit. So this could be maybe one of your 2 Tau Elite units, the Broadside Battlesuit or the Crisis Battle Guard.
Sure.
Both of those are beefy enough to hold the attachment, and also with a minimum 3 damage for the Battle Guard and 4 for the Broadside, you're going to be threatening a lot of damage against, maybe you're playing against the Chaos and they have a lot of Elite units, so that's a good way to maybe take those out. Other than that, as you say, there's no, you can't use it on vehicles, so I guess Caius Roth, if you were playing him, could hold it. He's also a beefy unit. I really wouldn't want to put this on any unit that didn't have, at minimum, 5 HP, because you want to keep it alive long enough to get some use out of it.
Well, considering in the near future, elites are going to start getting a considerable bit of support once we start seeing Backlash and similar cards, I suppose I'll be curious to see what exactly an elite-heavy build for Starblaze looks like, just because it seems, as with so many other decks, it's all about 1-cost ranged units, 2-cost, 2 command icon units. So that's definitely going to open up some interesting possibilities.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. Tau, or Starblaze rather, has only access to 3 elite units. The 2 Crisis suits that I mentioned, and the Shrieking Basilisk, which is not, to say it lightly, the most efficient unit in the game. It is a 3 damage ranged unit, but it can't hold war gear. So things like the ion rifle are not any use for it.
Sure. And at a cost of 6.
Yeah, that would be lovely. Undoubtedly, we'll be seeing more elite units as the cycle goes on, and I'm very interested to see what those will look like once we get this elite support. I am looking forward to it a great deal. It's been a long-standing complaint of mine that these elite units are very difficult to play efficiently, and I think Tau elite units in particular have the drawback of needing to swing in combat to really get any use out of them, as compared to something like a Searing Gleeful Plague Beast, which can clear the board just by the combat phase beginning. It doesn't have to swing in combat.
Right.
Or something like the Terminators, the Salamander Terminators that just deal damage by being attacked. The Tau elite units have to actually be able to swing in combat, and so they're vulnerable to all these exhaustion effects and control effects that we've discussed previously.
It seems like they're very keyword focused as opposed to just having some sort of, passive helpful ability there.
Yeah, exactly.
The only signature card we've yet to discuss is Starblaze's Outpost. Clearly that's only a 1-copy card, but if there's anything that's a combo enabler, it's going to be that card. But on the scarcely few occasions when you've managed to stumble upon that card, and I imagine it helps playing a long game, you're more likely to see it. Do you have any good experiences with Starblaze's Outpost? It's you exhaust the support, you bounce an Astra Militarum army unit to your hand, and you swap it with an equal or lower printed cost Tau unit, and of course that new unit is ready. Have you been able to use that to significant effect?
The great thing about Starblaze's Outpost isn't necessarily what it can do, but what it potentially allows you to do. By having it on the field, your opponent has to now consider every single card you have exhausted, or every single AM card you have on the field, and how it could potentially be swapped out for a Tau card. So if you're on a planet with, one of the dream combos would be you're at a planet maybe later in the game where you had a Sanctioned Psyker just kind of sitting there, minding his own business, and suddenly he's in the middle of a combat. You wait until all your enemy's units are exhausted, and most likely he's been ignoring the Psyker here to now, and suddenly you could put a Borkan Recruit into play. So what it does is your opponent now has to consider every single AM unit on the field. What can it become? Can this turn into a Borkan Recruit? Can it turn into a Fire Warrior Elite, and suddenly I can't attack any of the units that I want to attack? Can it turn into a Viola Marksman, and suddenly I've got a ranged unit to deal with where none was there before? So that's really what you want to look for with this unit, is you want to it puts pressure on the enemy. It can allow for different combos, different effects, ambush effects that you wouldn't have otherwise had access to. I think when this first came out, the dream combination for this was to have a Tau unit taken out of play, maybe a Tau warrior unit, and then you put in a Elysian drop team into play. You attack with the Elysian, you exhaust the outpost, and you put a Borkhan recruit into play. Then the Borkhan recruit dies, or swings, and then dies subsequently, and you can put that assault trooper back into play for a second time. So you can get some really crazy combos going with this if you have the proper cards in hand.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely can. I suppose it all comes down to, are you able to play a strong enough economic game to manage to come across those cards? But I suppose when it all comes down to it, a lot of players are concerned about competitive ranking, like power tier. Certainly Broderick War, which was released in Decree of Ruin alongside Commander Starblaze, made a huge splash. Everybody's clamoring around him being a impact tier 1 top of the line warlord. How do you think Commander Starblaze compares relative to some of our other, strong competitive options? Do you think that he's a tournament class warlord, or what's your initial impression?
My impression of Starblaze is that he would be at what is, I think, colloquially being referred to as tier 2, which puts him behind tier 1 and tier 1.5, the top competitive warlords. Those two tiers being the ones you'd really want to take if you're going to a tournament with prizes being involved. I think Starblaze falls into tier 2 because he is still vulnerable to all of these point control effects. He's very vulnerable to Archon's Terror, as mentioned, or the Clavax War Leader, or even just being exhausted. He doesn't have, and he in turn doesn't really have access to these abilities himself. The only point control card he really has access to is Suppressive Fire, which is Exhaust 1 unit. As well, he doesn't have access to direct damage effects out of combat like Chaos might. So he has a difficult time dealing with strong units like with Starblaze's Starbane's Council, the signature unit of Eldoras Starbane. He has difficulty dealing with Archon's Terror and Clavax War Leader, and then he has difficulty dealing with things like an Honored Librarian out of Space Marine, because he's got no way of really dealing damage outside of a combat swing. So it's really the same issues you see being faced by Shadow Sun. They have access to a lot of great cards. They have really powerful attachments that they can put on these cards, like the gun drones. Everyone knows that gun drones is a really powerful card, but again, you've got to be able to swing in combat to make use of them. And there's just too many ways for the tier 1 competitive warlords to deny you that ability. So until Tau get access to some way to mitigate that, either by protecting their units or some other way of having direct control, I think they're going to remain at that lower tier.
Well, let's say that somebody is struggling against Commander Starblaze. What do you think might be a good overall strategy for how to try to work around our latest Tau warlord? Like, obviously there are some weaknesses there, but how would you try to go about picking apart, this warlord's strategy?
You want to be able to pressure Commander Starblaze back. You can't let him dominate the command phase. So whether that means, first of all, like I said, you look at the planet layout, and if you can see a quick victory, then you really want to try and take it. Put a bunch of units on the first 3 planets and try to win as quickly as possible. If you're stuck with a long game, say you're not going to win before planet 5, then you need to put pressure back on him and either start taking out his command units. This can be done in a couple different ways. You could use a planet like Aatrox Prime to start damaging command units adjacent to it. You could use your own out-of-damage combat effects, or you can just go directly, take your warlord directly to those planets and take them out. You want to be able to keep Starblaze from getting his powerful units, into play. So if you see something like a Valkyrie, then you got to think of how do you deal with this card. It's pretty rare these days to take flying units, so you've got to work around the fact that they have the damage coming at them. So Valkyrie is a favorite unit of Starblaze. You can deal with it either with out of combat damage, like direct damage events. You can deal with it through point control, routing. Just see what he has in play and think to yourself, how do I keep this from becoming a pitched battle? How do I divide up his units? Or if he has a big Warlord train coming out of HQ, then how can I deal the most amount of damage before all of his units come online?
Well, I certainly agree with you there, and just as a means of bringing things to a close, any final thoughts on Commander Starblaze, or any advice you'd like to offer to players that are looking to pilot, prospectively pilot our latest Tau Warlord?
I think that Starblaze has the potential to reach a competitive tier. It really depends a lot on what's coming out in the next couple of packs. I'm really interested to see what both the Tau and Astra Militarum will be getting in packs 2 and 3 of this cycle, since very few cards have been spoiled here to now. I think that there's an issue right now with the Astra Militarum offensive cards that Starblaze has access to. You have a really expensive Valkyrie, or you have some weaker units, lower HP units. So every new unit that comes out for Astra Militarum is going to be another unit that Starblaze can make use of. And he can make use of in different ways than the current Astra Militarum Warlords can. He has better access to equipment and better access to spike damage. So, tips for using Starblaze, again, look to play the long game, stretch out the game, look at the cards you have available to you, and think, because he's still new, there's still other combos to be had. Something I'd like to try out with him is making use of the Kroot mercenaries that reward you 3 resources once they are killed, because that's a way of keeping your resource game up, letting you afford those expensive Valkyries and other units that are coming out. I think Starblaze is at his best when he keeps the opponent guessing. He has access to a lot of different units and supports that can do this, and I think this is where his strength is going to be going forward. So if you have a Catachan outpost, an ambush platform, and a staging ground in play, there's a lot of unknowns that the enemy has to consider when making each move, and a lot of flexibility that you have in altering the combat math in your favor. So I personally think that this is where Starblaze can really excel with a surprise game, and I think that a lot of the upcoming cards will help with this. We saw in the Necrons preview the Standard Bearer, which was a Astra Militarum unit that readies one of your units when it comes into play. This is potential to really activate some of Starblaze's strongest units and keep the opponent, again, guessing and always fearing for where is the spike damage going to come from.
Yeah, I think personally one of my favorite aspects of this game as a living card game is every time we see some exciting new mechanic come out, like all of a sudden Tau being able to ally with Astra Militarum, we have to reassess all of the old cards, everything that's still yet to come. Now we have to look at it from an entirely different perspective, like the Standard Bearer. How is that going to work with Commander Starblaze? Everything from now on that comes out for the AM until Commander Starblaze eventually goes out of rotation, there's just going to be so much consideration to take place, and it's just a fascinating thought experiment. And like you mentioned yourself, the more unknowns there are, the more possibilities there are. Your opponent's going to have to be doing so much mental guesswork, and whether or not Starblaze ends up as tier 1 or not, that could definitely provide a bit of a headache for your opponent. But I suppose before we finally close this interview out, any final words or shout-outs, anything else you want to throw out there to the interwebs?
Shout out to FFG for making this game. It's held all of our attention for at most a year and a half since it's come out. I think it's a really exciting time for the game as we finally have packs coming out, and we can all be excited about new unspoiled things to look forward to. I'd like to give a shout out to Samuel Mann, Samman11, for organizing the Octagon Leagues, which is, as a father of a young child and a very difficult work schedule, one of the few ways I have to really enjoy this game. Shout out to yourself, Mr. Hive Tyrant, for all the great content you're putting out. It's really...
Well, thanks.
It's great stuff, and I don't just say that because I feature in many of your Octagon videos.
Right.
And shout out to you, the viewer, for keeping the community strong. We couldn't do it without all these people playing and watching, and just looking at the latest Octagon League, the participation has exploded. So definitely the there's a lot of momentum behind this game, and I'm looking forward to seeing where things go.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree. It's been a fantastic ride thus far. It looks like the options are only going to expand and become more intriguing in Sorceling from here, so I agree it's a fantastic game. So personal thanks to Fantasy Flight for making such an awesome thing, and kudos to our developer Brad Andrews for managing to design something pretty fantastic in my opinion. But, Guy, thank you so much for coming on, finally getting the opportunity to talk Commander Starblaze. I'll be very curious to see if he makes much of a presence at the 2016 World Championship. But until then, take care of yourself, and thank you for the interview.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mitch.
Well, with our interview having come to a close, I'll just conclude this video by saying thank you once again for watching, and be sure to leave a comment sharing your own perspective, experience, or even pure speculation when it comes to not just Commander Starblaze, but the Planetfall cycle iteration of the Tau faction as a whole. Interaction with viewers like you will always be the absolute highlight of my creating content for this channel, so please take a moment to let me know not just what you thought of this interview, but also which warlord or topic you'd like to see discussed next. If you happen to know someone that would make a good candidate to guest star in a future interview, you're encouraged to share. But with that said, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you've not done so already, or if you are already subscribed, you're always encouraged to share this content, because the more eyes there are upon these videos, the more potential new players may end up being drawn to this game, and as a result, we serve only to ever expand our still growing Conquest community. Please feel free to contact me directly or keep in touch through Twitter or on Facebook, and if you ever feel so inclined to help support this channel, I would be absolutely honored were you to make a donation to my Patreon. But once again, thank you so much for watching, and as always, be sure to check back in again soon for much more Conquest LCG content to come.